Hello everyone, welcome back to Buried Files. Tonight we bring you 7 deeply disturbing true trucker horror stories that will make you question what really happens on America's loneliest highways after dark. These are not fabricated tales designed for entertainment, but authentic encounters documented by professional drivers who witnessed horror on the open road. Each story has been carefully compiled from trucker testimonials, law enforcement reports, and verified incident records that confirm these events truly occurred. The endless highways that connect our nation appear safe and familiar during daylight hours. But when darkness falls and civilization fades into the distance, something sinister emerges from the shadows. What you are about to hear includes encounters with human predators who hunt the isolated, unexplained phenomena that defy logical explanation, and mysteries that authorities still cannot solve to this day. From desolate rest stops to abandoned way stations, the places truckers rely on for safety can sometimes become traps for the vulnerable. If you appreciate authentic horror content rooted in real experiences that will disturb you long after this video ends, subscribe to Buried Files and activate the notification bell so you never miss our investigations into documented cases of roadside terror. After you finish listening to these chilling accounts, we want to hear from you in the comments below about your own experiences on the highway or any unexplained encounters you have witnessed. Now settle in, dim your lights, and prepare yourself as we explore the darkness that waits along America's most dangerous roads. Samuel had been driving long-haul routes for 3 years. The job was simple enough on paper. Pick up loads from distribution centers, deliver them on time across state lines, and keep moving. Most nights were quiet. Empty highways stretched out endlessly beneath distant stars, accompanied only by the steady hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of the CB radio. The solitude never bothered him. In fact, he preferred it. No office politics, no micromanagement, just him and the open road. But there was one stretch of Interstate 40 through New Mexico that always made him uneasy. A place where the rest stops felt fundamentally wrong in a way he could not articulate, even to himself. The route between Tucumcari and Albuquerque was notorious among truckers. Not for accidents or bad road conditions, but for something else entirely. Something that drivers only discussed in hushed tones at truck stops over late-night coffee, and even then, only with people they trusted. There was a particular rest area located roughly halfway between the two cities, sitting isolated in a stretch of desert where the civilization seemed to have forgotten to take root. During the day, it looked normal enough. Standard government-issue bathrooms constructed from cinder blocks, a handful of vending machines that usually worked, a few weathered picnic tables scattered across patchy grass, and adequate lighting that functioned during operational hours. Nothing unusual, nothing threatening. Other drivers had warned Samuel about it during his first year on the road. Do not stop there after dark. An older trucker named Frank had told him at a diner in Oklahoma. Just keep driving. Find another place, any other place. When Samuel asked why, Frank's expression had darkened. He shook his head slowly and said, "Some places are wrong. That is all you need to know. Trust me on this." Samuel had laughed it off at the time, dismissing it as superstition or exaggeration. Truckers loved their ghost stories and urban legends. It came with the territory of spending so many hours alone in the dark. But Samuel had always been careful to heed that advice anyway, planning his fuel stops to avoid that particular rest area whenever possible. For 3 years, he had successfully bypassed it, sometimes driving an extra 30 miles out of his way just to refuel elsewhere. Until the night his fuel gauge dropped too low to make it to the next town, and he had no choice but to pull in. It was a Tuesday in late September, The air had started to turn cold after sunset, and Samuel had been driving for 11 hours straight, pushing to make his delivery deadline. He watched the fuel needles sink lower and lower, the warning light glowing amber on his dashboard, mocking his poor planning. The rest stop appeared in his headlights around 2 o'clock in the morning. The parking lot was almost entirely empty, which was unusual even for that hour. Typically, at least a few trucks would be parked overnight, their drivers catching mandatory sleep hours to comply with federal regulations. But tonight, there was only one other semi-visible in the far corner of the lot, its lights completely off, sitting dark and silent like an abandoned hulk. Samuel felt his stomach tighten as he pulled in, but he pushed the feeling aside. He was being irrational. It was just a rest stop, just a place to use the bathroom and maybe grab a terrible cup of vending machine coffee before continuing on his route. He parked his rig near the bathroom facility, leaving his engine running and his lights on. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered intermittently, casting unstable shadows across the pavement. Some of the bulbs had burned out entirely, leaving pools of darkness between the illuminated sections. Samuel grabbed his flashlight from the glove compartment, more out of habit than necessity, and stepped out into the cold night air. The wind had picked up, carrying with it the smell of dust and something else. Something organic and unpleasant that he could not quite identify. The bathroom was exactly as depressing as he expected. Cracked tiles, graffiti-covered stalls, a sink that dripped constantly despite the handle being turned off. He did his business quickly, eager to get back on the road and put this place behind him. The fluorescent light inside buzzed loudly, and he could hear something skittering in the walls. Probably rats. Desert rats were common in facilities like this. He washed his hands with water that came out rust-colored at first, dried them on his jeans since the paper towel dispenser was empty, and pushed open the door to head back outside. That was when he saw her. A woman was standing next to his truck. She was wearing a stained dress that might have been white once, but had yellowed with age and dirt. Her feet were bare despite the cold pavement. Her hair hung down in tangled dark strands that obscured most of her face. She stood perfectly still, not moving at all, just staring at his truck with an intensity that immediately set off alarm bells in Samuel's mind. He stopped walking, his hand instinctively tightening around the flashlight. "Excuse me," the woman called out, her voice high and strained. "Can you help me? My car broke down." She gestured vaguely toward the darkness beyond the parking lot, toward the empty desert where there were no roads, no vehicles, nothing at all. Samuel's eyes followed her gesture and saw only blackness. No broken down car, no vehicle of any kind, not even tire tracks in the dirt. "Where is your car?" Samuel asked, keeping his distance. Every instinct he had developed over 3 years on the road was screaming at him that something was very wrong with his situation. The woman took a step closer, and that was when Samuel got a better look at her face. Her eyes were wrong. They reflected the overhead lights in a way that human eyes should not, almost like an animal's eyes caught in headlights. They glowed with a faint amber luminescence that made his skin crawl. "It is just over there," she said, pointing again to the empty darkness. "I just need a ride. Just a short ride. Please, I have been waiting for so long." Her voice had taken on a pleading quality, but there was something rehearsed about it. Something that sounded like she was reciting lines rather than genuinely asking for help. She took another step closer, and Samuel noticed that she was not actually walking. Her feet were moving, but they were not making contact with the ground in the way they should. She seemed to glide across the pavement. "I cannot help you," Samuel said firmly, moving toward his truck. "You should call the police if you need assistance." He pulled his keys from his pocket and picked up his pace. The woman's expression changed instantly. The pleading look vanished, replaced by something cold and predatory. Her mouth stretched into a smile that was far too wide, revealing teeth that seemed too numerous and too sharp. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice dropping to a lower register that no longer sounded remotely human. "We are not finished talking." That was when Samuel saw movement from the corners of his vision. Other figures were emerging from the shadows around the bathroom building. 3 of them, 4, 5. He could not tell exactly how many because they moved in ways that made it difficult to focus on them directly. They wore similar stained clothing, and they all had that same wrong quality to their eyes. Samuel ran. He sprinted the last 20 feet to his truck, yanking open the driver's side door and throwing himself inside. His hands were shaking as he slammed the door shut and jabbed the lock button. The figures surrounded his truck immediately, moving with unnatural speed. They pressed their faces against the windows, their breath fogging the glass. Their hands pounded on the doors, scratching at the metal, trying the handles over and over again. The woman who had first approached him stood directly in front of his hood, staring at him through the windshield with those terrible glowing eyes. Samuel's heart hammered in his chest as he put the truck in gear. His rational mind kept trying to tell him that these were just people, maybe on drugs or suffering from some kind of mental illness, and that he should call the police rather than fleeing. But his survival instincts overrode those thoughts. Every fiber of his being told him that these were not people, not anymore. Maybe they never had been. He pressed down on the accelerator, and the truck lurched forward. The woman in front of his hood did not move. For a horrible moment, Samuel thought he was going to hit her, but at the last second, she simply vanished. One instant she was there, the next she was gone, as if she had never existed at all. The other figures released their grip on his truck and fell away as he picked up speed. In his side mirrors, he saw them standing in the parking lot, watching him leave. They did not chase after him. They simply stood there in a group, perfectly still, until his taillights carried him beyond visual range. Samuel did not stop. He drove straight through the fuel warning, driven by pure adrenaline and fear. The next town with lights and people and normalcy was 40 miles away, and he covered that distance in record time, his eyes constantly checking the mirrors to make sure nothing was following him. He pulled into a brightly lit truck stop in Albuquerque just as his fuel gauge hit it empty. His hands were still shaking as he filled his tank. The fluorescent lights and the presence of other people made him feel marginally safer. But he could not shake the memory of those glowing eyes and that too wide smile. He went inside and bought a cup of coffee, trying to calm his nerves. An older man at the counter noticed his distressed state and asked if he was all right. "I just stopped at that rest area on I-40, Samuel said quietly. "The one between here and Tucumcari. There were people there. Strange people." The older man's face went pale. He set down his coffee and looked Samuel directly in the eyes with an expression of grim understanding. "You got out," the man said simply. "Consider yourself lucky. Not everyone does." Before Samuel could ask what he meant, the man paid for his coffee and walked out into the parking lot, leaving Samuel alone with more questions than answers. The next day, after getting some sleep in a motel room where he pushed a chair against the door for extra security, Samuel drove to the local police station and filed a report. The officer who took his statement listened with a neutral expression, writing down the details without commentary. When Samuel finished describing what he had experienced, the officer set down his pen and sighed heavily. "You are not the first person to report something like this about that rest area," he said. "We have had dozens of complaints over the years. Strange people, disappearances, vehicles found abandoned with no trace of the drivers. But every time we send units out there, we find nothing. No evidence, no witnesses. Just an empty rest stop." The officer leaned back in his chair and studied Samuel carefully. "Officially, I am required to tell you that you probably encountered transients or individuals under the influence of controlled substances. Unofficially, I would advise you to find a different route if you drive through here again." Samuel took that advice to heart. He requested route changes from his dispatcher, opting for longer drives through different states rather than ever traveling that section of I-40 again. He would rather add 6 hours to his trip than risk another encounter with whatever waited at that rest stop. Over the following months, he heard more stories from other drivers. Stories about the rest area between Tucumcari and Albuquerque. Stories about drivers who stopped there and were never seen again, their trucks found abandoned with engines still running and doors hanging open. Stories about things that looked like people but moved wrong and had eyes that glowed in the dark. Samuel never learned what those things actually were. He never wanted to know. Some questions are better left unanswered. Some places are better left avoided. He had been lucky that night. Luckier than he probably deserved, given his poor decision to stop despite all the warnings. The memory of those glowing eyes and that inhuman smile would stay with him for the rest of his life, surfacing in his dreams whenever he let his guard down. He eventually left the trucking industry altogether after 5 years on the road, taking a local delivery job that never required him to drive at night or venture into isolated areas. But sometimes, when he was lying in bed trying to fall asleep, he would think about that rest stop. He would wonder if those figures were still there, waiting in the darkness for the next unsuspecting driver to pull in after sunset. He would wonder how many people had stopped there over the years, how many had not been fortunate enough to make it back to their trucks, how many families were still waiting for loved ones who would never come home. And he would be grateful that he had listened to his instincts that night, that he had run instead of trying to help, that he had survived an encounter with something that should not exist but undeniably did. The rest stop is still there, marked on maps and GPS systems as a legitimate facility for travelers. The bathrooms still function, the vending machines still dispense stale snacks and warm sodas. The parking lot still offers space for trucks and cars to pull off the highway for a brief respite. But the warnings continue to circulate among those who drive the long-haul routes through New Mexico. Do not stop there after dark. Do not interact with anyone you see there. Do not get out of your vehicle if you absolutely must pull in. And whatever you do, if someone asks you for help, do not listen. Just drive away as fast as you can, and do not look back. Aria did not usually pick up hitchhikers. Company policy explicitly forbade it, and she knew better than to violate that rule. She had been driving commercial trucks for 7 years, and in that time, she had heard every horror story imaginable about drivers who picked up strangers on the road. Robberies, assaults, carjackings, worse. The stories were enough to make anyone think twice before offering a ride to someone standing on the shoulder with their thumb out. But it was pouring rain on Route 90 through Montana, the kind of torrential downpour that made visibility almost impossible even with the wipers on full speed. And the man standing on the shoulder looked genuinely desperate. He was soaked completely through, his clothes plastered to his body, shivering visibly even from a distance. He waved frantically as her headlights approached, both arms raised above his head in a gesture of desperation that seemed impossible to ignore. Araya felt a pang of sympathy as she passed him. The temperature had dropped significantly after sunset, and hypothermia was a real possibility in conditions like these. She checked her mirrors and saw him standing there, growing smaller in the distance, still waving, against every rule and every instinct that had kept her safe for 7 years. She made a decision she would later deeply regret. She pulled onto the shoulder about 50 yards ahead and waited. The man ran to catch up, splashing through puddles, his shoes making squelching sounds against the wet pavement. When he reached the passenger door, Arya unlocked it and he climbed in quickly, bringing with him the smell of rain and wet fabric. Water dripped from his hair and clothes, pooling on the floor mat beneath his feet. "Thank you," he said breathlessly, his voice ragged from the cold. "Thank you so much. I thought I was going to die out there." He pulled the door shut and immediately held his hands up to the heating vents, trying to warm his fingers. Arya studied him briefly in the dim glow of the dashboard lights. He appeared to be in his mid-30s, average height, unremarkable features. Nothing immediately threatening about his appearance. He looked exactly like someone whose car had broken down in terrible weather. "What happened?" Arya asked, pulling back onto the highway. The rain continued to hammer against the windshield, and she kept her speed cautious. "Did your car break down?" "Yeah," the man said, nodding vigorously. "About 5 miles back. Engine just died. No warning, nothing. I tried to restart it, but got nothing. My phone is dead too. Could not call for help." He ran his hands through his wet hair, pushing it back from his face. "I am John, by the way. I really appreciate this. You are a lifesaver." "Arya," she replied, keeping her eyes on the road. "Where do you need to go?" It seemed like a reasonable question. She needed to know where to drop him off, whether it was the next town or somewhere more specific. But John did not answer immediately. He looked out the window at the darkness rushing past, at the rain streaking horizontally across the glass. "Just keep driving," he said after a long pause. "I will let you know." That response should have been her first warning, but Arya attributed it to shock or cold or general disorientation from his ordeal. She decided not to press the issue and focused on navigating through the storm. For several miles, they drove in relative silence. John continued to hold his hands near the vents, occasionally rubbing them together. Arya tried to make casual conversation, asking about where he was from and where he had been heading before his car broke down. "I am from around here," John said vaguely. "Just passing through, you know. Going to see some family." His answers were generic and unhelpful, lacking any real detail. When Arya asked which town his family lived in, he changed the subject. "You haul freight often on this route?" "Sometimes," Arya replied cautiously. "Depends on what I am assigned." She did not like how the conversation had shifted. Now he was asking her questions. Personal questions. Questions about her route and her schedule. "Where exactly are you delivering tonight?" John asked, his tone casual but his interest clearly focused. "Anyone expecting you? Do they know what time you will arrive?" Arya's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Those were not normal questions for someone grateful for a ride. Those were questions someone asked when they were gathering information, when they were planning something. She glanced over at John again and noticed something that made her stomach drop. His hands were completely clean. Not just clean, but immaculate. No grease stains, no dirt, no oil. Nothing that would be present on someone who had just been working on a broken-down vehicle on the side of a muddy highway. His fingernails were perfectly trimmed and spotless. "My dispatcher knows exactly where I am." Arya lied smoothly, trying to keep the fear out of her voice. "I have GPS tracking on this rig. They monitor my location constantly. That was partially true. The company did have GPS tracking, but they were not actively monitoring her position unless she missed a check-in or deviated significantly from her planned route. Still, she hoped the lie would be enough to make him reconsider whatever he was planning. John's demeanor changed subtly. The grateful, desperate quality in his voice evaporated, replaced by something colder. "Is that right?" he said quietly. "That is good to know." He shifted in his seat, and Arya caught movement from the corner of her eye. His hand was moving toward his jacket, reaching inside toward something concealed there. Her heart began to race. She needed to do something, needed to change the situation before it escalated beyond her control. She spotted her CB radio mounted on the dashboard and made a split-second decision. Reaching over, she grabbed the handset and thumbed the button, speaking loudly and clearly into it. "This is Arya Williams, driving rig number 2473. I am currently on Route 90 eastbound, approximately 20 miles west of Billings. I have picked up a male passenger at mile marker 115 who identified himself as John. He is approximately 5'10", brown hair, wearing a dark jacket. Dispatcher, please acknowledge and make a note in my log." There was no one on the other end. She had not actually called anyone. The CB was set to a random channel, and her words were going out into the void. But John did not know that. He froze, his hand still inside his jacket, his eyes locked on her. The friendly facade had completely disappeared now, replaced by barely contained anger. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice hard and threatening. "Why are you giving out descriptions?" Arya kept her expression neutral, her hand still holding the CB handset. "Company policy," she said firmly. "Anytime I have a passenger, I have to report it. Safety protocol. You understand?" She set the handset back in its cradle but kept her hand near it, making it clear she could grab it again at any moment. John stared at her for a long moment, his jaw clenched tight. Then slowly, deliberately, he removed his hand from his jacket. In it was a knife. Not a pocket knife or utility tool, but a fixed-blade hunting knife with a serrated edge, the kind designed for maximum damage. He held it casually, almost lazily, but the threat was unmistakable. "Stop the truck," he said quietly. "No," Arya replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "I am not stopping until we reach the next truck stop. There are people there, cameras, police if needed. You can get out then." She pressed down slightly on the accelerator, bringing the truck up to a faster speed despite the rain. Her mind was racing through her options. She could not stop. Stopping would put her at his mercy, but she also could not let this continue indefinitely. "I said stop the truck," John shouted, lunging toward her with the knife. Arya jerked the wheel hard to the right, throwing him off balance. He grabbed at the dashboard to steady himself, and in that moment, Arya saw lights ahead. A truck stop. Bright, fluorescent lights, cutting through the rain like a beacon. She aimed for it, her foot heavy on the accelerator now, pushing the rig faster than was safe in these conditions. John saw where they were heading and his expression turned desperate. "Do not go there," he said, the knife still in his hand, but his voice now pleading rather than threatening. "Just let me out here, right here. I will get out and you will never see me again." But Arya was not stopping. Not now. Not for anything. She pulled into the truck stop at high speed, laying on the horn continuously, making as much noise as possible. Other truckers were parked there, taking shelter from the storm, and heads turned at the commotion. Arya slammed on the brakes, throwing the truck into park before it had fully stopped. She yanked open her door and jumped out, screaming at the top of her lungs. "Help! Someone help me! He has a knife!" Other drivers came running immediately, attracted by her screams and the blaring horn. John tried to flee, pushing open the passenger door and bolting toward the darkness at the edge of the parking lot. But several truckers gave chase, tackling him before he could disappear into the woods beyond the truck stop. Someone called the police, while others held John down on the wet pavement. Aria stood next to her truck, shaking uncontrollably now that the immediate danger had passed, the adrenaline draining from her system and leaving her weak. A woman put a blanket around her shoulders and guided her inside the truck stop building, away from the rain and the chaos. Within 15 minutes, police arrived with lights flashing and sirens wailing. The officers took statements from everyone present. When they searched John, they found more than just the knife. In his jacket pockets were zip ties, a roll of duct tape, and a length of rope. In his pants pocket was a second smaller knife and a bottle of pills that turned out to be sedatives. The police officer who interviewed Aria was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes, but a grim expression. "You were very lucky," the officer said quietly, sitting across from Aria in a booth inside the truck stop diner. "This man has been on our radar for several months. We believe he has been targeting truckers on this route, particularly solo female drivers. There have been 3 disappearances in the past year along Route 90, all women driving alone at night. We have not been able to connect him definitively to those cases yet. But given what we found on him tonight, we will be investigating further." Aria felt sick. 3 women. 3 drivers just like her who had probably done the same thing she had, picking up someone who seemed to need help, only to discover too late that they had invited a predator into their vehicle. "Why truckers?" Aria asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why target us?" The officer's expression was sympathetic, but also frustrated. "Truckers are vulnerable in specific ways," she explained. "You spend long hours alone on isolated roads. You often drive at night when there are fewer witnesses. Your vehicles are large and can be difficult to stop quickly. And many people assume that truckers are tough, that they can handle themselves. So they are less likely to be seen as victims. Predators understand these things. They look for patterns and opportunities." John was arrested and charged with attempted kidnapping, assault with a deadly weapon, and possession of burglary tools. During processing, his fingerprints matched evidence from one of the disappearance cases, leading to additional charges of murder. The investigation revealed that he had been living in his car, moving up and down Route 90, specifically targeting truck stops and rest areas during storms when visibility was poor and drivers might be more inclined to offer help to someone stranded in dangerous weather. Aria's decision to use the CB radio, even though it was essentially a bluff, had likely saved her life. By announcing his presence and description, she had made John understand that his window of opportunity was closing, that other people now knew he was with her. It had bought her enough time to reach safety. The police commended her quick thinking and her courage in fighting back, rather than complying with his demands. But the experience changed Aria fundamentally. She installed additional security measures in her truck, including a panic button connected directly to dispatch and a dashboard camera that recorded continuously. She took self-defense courses and started carrying pepper spray within easy reach. Most importantly, she never picked up another hitchhiker. Not in rain, not in snow, not in any circumstances. She understood now that compassion could be weaponized by those who preyed on the kindness of others. She continued driving trucks, refusing to let fear push her out of a career she loved. But she was more cautious now, more aware of the dangers that existed on the roads she traveled every day. She shared her story with other drivers whenever she could, hoping to prevent someone else from making the same mistake she had. The trucking community was tight-knit, and word spread quickly about the arrest and what had happened that night on Route 90. Araya never learned what happened to the 3 women who had disappeared before her encounter with John. Their bodies were never recovered, and John refused to cooperate with investigators regarding their fates. Their families continued to wait for answers that might never come. But Arya knew she'd been given a second chance that those women had not received. She had survived because of quick thinking, a bit of luck, and the willingness to fight back when it mattered most. It was a lesson she would carry with her for the rest of her life, and one she hoped other drivers would learn before it was too late. David was hauling freight through West Virginia when he saw it. Another semi pulled off on the shoulder with its hazard lights flashing rhythmically in the darkness. It was 3 o'clock in the morning on a stretch of highway where there was nothing but dense forest for miles in every direction. No towns, no gas stations, no rest areas. Just endless trees pressing close to both sides of the road. David had driven this route dozens of times over the past 5 years, and he knew exactly how isolated it was. The sight of a stopped truck immediately triggered his concern. Truckers looked out for each other on the road. It was an unwritten rule of the profession. If someone needed help, you stopped. But something about the scene made David hesitate. His hands tightened on the steering wheel as he approached, his headlights illuminating the other truck in stark detail. The rig looked newer, well-maintained. Nothing obviously wrong with it from external observation. Yet there it sat on the shoulder, hazards blinking, seemingly abandoned. David's instincts told him something was off, but his sense of professional duty pushed back against that feeling. What if the driver was injured? What if they needed medical assistance? He would never forgive himself if he drove past someone in genuine distress. He pulled his truck onto the shoulder about 20 feet behind the other vehicle and put on his own hazards. Before getting out, he grabbed his flashlight from the door pocket and his cell phone, checking the signal. No bars. Of course not. This stretch of highway was notorious for dead zones, where cellular coverage simply did not exist. He would have to rely on his CB radio if he needed to call for help. David opened his door and stepped out into the cold night air. The temperature had dropped significantly, and his breath formed visible clouds in the beam of his flashlight. The other truck's engine was still running. David could hear it idling, a steady mechanical rumble that seemed unnaturally loud in the silent forest. That struck him as odd immediately. If the driver had experienced a breakdown, why would the engine still be running? He approached cautiously, his boots crunching on the gravel shoulder. "Hello?" he called out. "Anyone here? Do you need help?" His voice seemed to be absorbed by the surrounding trees, producing no echo, generating no response. The driver's side door was hanging open. David shone his flashlight inside the cab and felt his stomach tighten. The interior looked like someone had left in a hurry, but also like they had been there very recently. The keys were still in the ignition, turned to the on position. A cup of coffee sat in the cup holder, and when David carefully touched the outside of the cup, it was still warm. The driver's seat was adjusted, as if someone had just been sitting there moments ago. A clipboard with shipping paperwork lay on the passenger seat, and a phone was plugged into the charger in the cigarette lighter port. "Hello?" David called again, louder this time. "Is anyone here? I am a trucker. I stopped to help." Nothing. No response. No movement. Just the endless dark forest and the idling engine, and the complete absence of any human presence. David walked around the truck, checking for signs of mechanical failure. The tires looked fine. No fluid leaks on the ground beneath the chassis. No smoke or unusual smells. Nothing that would explain why the driver would abandon a functioning vehicle with the engine running and the door open. Then David noticed the cargo area. The rear doors of the trailer were not sealed. They hung partially open, swinging slightly in the breeze that whispered through the trees. His flashlight beam caught the movement, and he felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. Cargo doors did not open themselves. Someone had to release the latch and pull them open. Either the driver had done it, or someone else had. David approached the back of the trailer slowly, every nerve in his body screaming at him to get back in his truck and leave. But he had come this far. He needed to see what was inside. Needed to understand what had happened here. He pulled one of the doors open wider, the hinges creaking loudly in the silence. His flashlight beam swept across the interior of the trailer, and what he saw made his blood run cold. The cargo had been torn apart. Cardboard boxes were ripped open, their contents scattered across the floor of the trailer. Packing materials lay strewn everywhere. But it was not the destruction of the cargo that horrified David. It was the blood. Dark stains smeared across the metal floor, splattered on the walls, handprints visible where someone had grabbed at the sides of the trailer. Not a massive amount, but enough. Enough to know that something terrible had happened here. David stumbled backward, his flashlight shaking in his trembling hand. His mind raced through possibilities, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. An accident? An attack? Something worse? He needed to call the police immediately. He turned and started walking quickly back toward his own truck, his breathing rapid and shallow. That was when he heard it. Movement in the forest. Not the rustling of leaves or the sound of wind through branches. This was something large moving through the undergrowth, snapping branches, heavy footfalls on the forest floor. David froze, his flashlight pointed toward the tree line where the sound originated. He could see nothing in the darkness beyond his small circle of light. But something was out there. Something was moving, and it was getting closer. His paralysis broke suddenly, and he ran. He sprinted back to his truck, his boots slipping on the loose gravel, his flashlight beam bouncing wildly. Behind him, the sounds from the forest intensified. Whatever was out there was no longer bothering to move quietly. David reached his truck and yanked, opened the door, throwing himself inside. His hands shook violently as he tried to turn the key, nearly dropping it. The engine roared to life, and he threw the transmission into gear without bothering to close his door properly. He accelerated hard, gravel spraying from beneath his tires, the door swinging shut from momentum. In his rearview mirror, illuminated briefly by his taillights, he saw something emerge from the tree line behind the abandoned truck. It was a figure. That was the only word his terrified mind could conjure. A figure that stood where the forest met the roadside, perfectly still, watching him flee. It was too far away and too dark for David to make out any details. But its posture was wrong. The proportions were wrong. It stood in a way that humans did not stand. And even from that distance, even through the mirror, David could feel its gaze fixed on him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. He did not stop. He drove for 30 minutes straight, pushing his speed as fast as he dared on the winding mountain highway, not slowing down until he saw the lights of a small town ahead. Only then did he pull into a gas station, park under the brightest lights he could find, and try to calm his racing heart. His hands were still shaking when he pulled out his phone and saw that he finally had a signal. He dialed 911 immediately. The police dispatcher listened to his report with professional calm, asking clarifying questions about the location and what he had witnessed. David gave them as many details as he could remember, describing the abandoned truck, the blood in the trailer, the sounds from the forest. The dispatcher assured him that units were being sent to investigate and took his contact information for follow-up. David sat in his truck for another hour, drinking terrible coffee from the gas station, unable to shake the image of that figure standing at the edge of the forest. The next morning, David received a call from a state police investigator. They had found the abandoned truck exactly where David described it. The scene matched his account. Blood in the trailer, cargo destroyed, engine still running, door open. But there was no sign of the driver. No body, no additional evidence, no indication of where the person had gone. The blood was sent for analysis. The truck was registered to a licensed freight company, and the driver had been a 42-year-old man named Marcus Reynolds, who had been hauling a load of agricultural supplies. Marcus Reynolds was never found. Search teams combed the surrounding forest for days, using dogs and helicopters and ground units. They found nothing. No body, no clothing, no trace of what had happened to him or where he had gone. The blood in the trailer was confirmed to be human and matched Marcus's blood type, but there was not enough of it to indicate a fatal injury. The case remained open but unsolved, adding to a disturbing pattern of disappearances along that particular stretch of highway. David learned that he was not the first person to report strange occurrences in that area. Over the past decade, 4 other truckers had vanished on that same section of West Virginia highway. Their vehicles were always found abandoned, engines running, doors open, no sign of struggle except for subtle indicators that something had gone terribly wrong. Local authorities had no explanation. Some speculated about a serial killer targeting truckers. Others suggested wild animals, though no known predator in the region could account for the pattern of disappearances. The experience changed David profoundly. He requested different routes from his dispatcher, refusing to drive through West Virginia again, despite the fact that it added hours to some of his deliveries. He quit long-haul trucking entirely 6 months later, taking a local job that kept him close to home and never required him to drive after dark. The memory of that abandoned truck and the figure standing at the edge of the forest haunted his dreams. Some roads were too dangerous. Some mysteries were better left unsolved. And some stretches of highway held secrets that were never meant to be discovered. Evelyn noticed him at a truck stop in Oklahoma. It was mid-afternoon on a Thursday, and she had pulled off Interstate 40 to refuel and grab something to eat before continuing her haul to Dallas. The truck stop was moderately busy, with a dozen or so rigs parked in the lot and regular traffic flowing through the fuel islands. Nothing unusual, nothing that set off any immediate alarms. But as Evelyn walked from the fuel pumps toward the main building, she caught sight of a man sitting in a dark blue sedan parked near the edge of the lot. He was watching her, not just glancing in her direction, but actively staring with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. She told herself she was being paranoid. Truck stops were public places where people came and went constantly. Maybe he was waiting for someone. Maybe he was just bored and people watching. She went inside, bought a sandwich and a large coffee, used the restroom, and returned to her truck. The man was still there in his car, and his eyes followed her across the parking lot. Evelyn felt the hair on the back of her neck stand up. But she climbed into her cab, locked the doors, and pulled back onto the highway. She checked her mirrors repeatedly as she merged into traffic, but the blue sedan did not follow. She exhaled slowly, relieved, and turned up the radio to distract herself from lingering unease. 3 hours later, Evelyn pulled into another truck stop just outside of Dallas. She needed to use the bathroom again and wanted to grab some more coffee for the final leg of her journey. The parking lot was larger here, with more trucks and more people. She felt safer with the crowds around her. She parked, grabbed her purse, and started walking toward the building. That was when she saw it. The same dark blue sedan, parked in almost the exact same position relative to the main building as it had been at the previous stop. And the same man sitting behind the wheel, staring directly at her. Evelyn's stomach dropped. This was not coincidence. Oklahoma to Texas, 3 hours apart, 2 completely different truck stops on 2 different interstate exits. And this man had somehow arrived before her and positioned himself where he could watch her. How? How had he known where she would stop? How had he gotten ahead of her when she had not seen him on the highway behind her? She stood frozen in the parking lot for a moment, her mind racing through explanations that made no sense. The man did not move. He just sat there watching her with that same unsettling intensity. Evelyn turned around and walked quickly back to her truck. She climbed inside, locked the doors immediately, and sat there trying to control her breathing. Her heart pounded in her chest. She pulled out her phone and called her dispatcher, explaining the situation as calmly as she could manage. The dispatcher took her seriously, thank God, and advised her to drive directly to the nearest police station rather than continuing her delivery route. He gave her the address of a station that was only 10 minutes away and told her he would call ahead to let them know she was coming. Evelyn started her engine and pulled out of the parking lot. In her side mirror, she saw the blue sedan pull out behind her. It maintained a distance of about 3 car lengths, not trying to catch up but not falling back either. Just following. Steadily, persistently. Evelyn felt panic rising in her throat. She accelerated, pushing her speed up to 10 miles over the limit. The sedan matched her speed. She changed lanes. The sedan changed lanes. Every turn she made, every maneuver she attempted, the sedan stayed with her like a shadow. The police station appeared ahead. A squat brick building with multiple patrol cars parked in front and a large lit sign identifying it as the Dallas County Sheriff's Department. Evelyn pulled into the parking lot at high speed, her brakes squealing as she came to a stop directly in front of the main entrance. The sedan followed her into the lot, but did not approach her truck. Instead, it circled around to the far end of the parking area and stopped, the engine still running, the driver still visible behind the wheel. Evelyn jumped out of her truck and ran toward the entrance of the building. She burst through the doors, startling the receptionist at the front desk, and blurted out that someone had been following her across state lines. The receptionist immediately called for officers, and within seconds, 3 deputies emerged from a back hallway. Evelyn explained everything quickly, pointing out through the glass doors to where the blue sedan was still parked. One of the deputies radioed for backup, while the other 2 went outside to approach the vehicle. Evelyn watched from inside as the deputies walked toward the sedan, with their hands resting on their service weapons. When they were about 10 feet away, the driver's door opened and the man stepped out. He held his hands up in a gesture of innocence, and Evelyn could see him talking to the officers, gesturing, smiling. He looked calm, too calm, like he had expected this, like he had a prepared explanation ready. The deputies spoke with him for several minutes. Then one of them walked back to the station, while the other remained with the man. The deputy who came inside approached Evelyn with a neutral expression. "Ma'am, the individual says he was trying to talk to you about your trailer. He claims he noticed one of your tires looked damaged at the first stop and wanted to warn you. He says he tried to catch up to you, but you left before he could say anything. So he continued following to the next stop to try again." Evelyn stared at the deputy in disbelief. "That is not true," she said firmly. "He never tried to approach me. He never waved or signaled. He just sat in his car and stared. And how would he know I would stop at that specific truck stop in Texas? How did he get there before me? The deputy nodded slowly. Those are good questions. We would like to search his vehicle with his consent. Would you be willing to wait here while we do that? Evelyn agreed immediately. She sat in the lobby of the police station, her hands wrapped around a cup of water someone had given her, watching through the windows as more officers arrived. The man was still outside by his car, and his demeanor had changed. He was no longer smiling. He looked agitated, his body language tense. The officers spoke with him at length, and eventually, he appeared to give consent for the search. 2 deputies began going through the sedan, while others kept the man at a distance. What they found made Evelyn's blood run cold. In the trunk of the car were zip ties, multiple bundles of them, still in their original packaging. Duct tape, a length of thick rope coiled neatly, a box cutter, a stun gun, and most disturbing of all, a folder containing printed surveillance photographs. Photographs of women. Different women at different truck stops, captured from a distance with a telephoto lens. Some of the photos had dates written on the back. Some had license plate numbers. Some had notes about routes and schedules. The man was arrested immediately. The deputies brought Evelyn outside to ask if she recognized any of the women in the photographs. She did not recognize any faces, but the pattern was clear. Every woman in those photos was a solo female trucker. Young women, middle-aged women, but all traveling alone in commercial vehicles. The man had been tracking them, following them, documenting their movements. For how long, the police could not say. The folder contained dozens of photographs spanning at least 6 months. During processing, the man's fingerprints and identification revealed his name was Carl Hendricks, and he had a criminal record. Assault, stalking, attempted kidnapping from 10 years earlier. He had served time and been released on parole 3 years ago. His parole conditions prohibited him from owning weapons and required him to maintain employment. But somehow he had been traveling freely across state lines, targeting women truckers without detection. The detective who interviewed Evelyn was a stern woman in her 50s who had worked sex crimes for 2 decades. She sat across from Evelyn in a small interview room and spoke with brutal honesty. "You are very lucky you trusted your instincts," the detective said. "This man has been on our radar for months. We have had reports from other female truckers about someone following them, but by the time we investigated, he was always gone. You are the first person who came directly to a police station and gave us the opportunity to apprehend him while he was actively engaged in stalking behavior." The detective explained that based on the evidence found in his vehicle and his pattern of behavior, Carl Hendricks was being charged with multiple counts of stalking across state lines, which made it a federal offense. The FBI would be taking over the investigation to determine if he was connected to any unsolved disappearances of female truckers in recent years. There had been 3 cases in the past 18 months where women driving commercial trucks had vanished without explanation. Their vehicles found abandoned at rest stops or truck stops, with no indication of what had happened to them. Evelyn felt sick. She realized how close she had come to becoming another statistic, another missing woman, whose family would spend years searching for answers that might never come. Her decision to call her dispatcher, to drive directly to the police station instead of trying to continue her route or confront the man herself, had likely saved her life. The detective commended her for staying calm and making smart choices under terrifying circumstances. Carl Hendricks refused to cooperate with investigators. He invoked his right to an attorney and declined to answer any questions about the photographs, the equipment in his car, or his activities over the past several months. But digital forensics analysis of his phone and laptop revealed extensive searches about female truckers, their typical routes, popular truck stops, and methods for disabling commercial vehicle security systems. He had been planning these attacks methodically, studying his targets, learning their patterns. The case made national news. Trucking companies across the country issued new safety protocols for their drivers, especially women traveling solo. Recommendations included maintaining constant communication with dispatchers, never stopping at isolated locations, parking only in well-lit areas with security cameras, and immediately reporting any suspicious behavior. Evelyn became an inadvertent spokesperson for trucker safety, giving interviews about her experience and urging other drivers to trust their instincts when something felt wrong. Evelyn continued driving trucks after the incident, refusing to let fear push her out of a career she had built over 15 years. But she made significant changes to how she operated. She installed a dash cam system that recorded continuously both inside and outside her cab. She enrolled in self-defense training and obtained a concealed carry permit. She joined online communities of female truckers where they shared information about safe stops and dangerous individuals. Most importantly, she never ignored that feeling in her gut when something seemed off. She thought about Carl Hendricks often, wondered about the women in those photographs, hoped they were all still alive and safe somewhere. The FBI investigation was ongoing, and she knew it might be years before they had answers about what he had done and who he had hurt. But she took comfort in knowing that he was behind bars, that he would not be targeting any other women on the highways, at least not for a very long time. And she hoped that her story would help other drivers recognize danger before it was too late. Joseph was driving through Louisiana when he heard it. A child screaming, crying for help in the darkness. The sound pierced through the rumble of his engine and the white noise of tires on asphalt, cutting straight into his consciousness with the kind of urgency that makes every protective instinct flare to life. It was the middle of the night, somewhere past 2 in the morning. He had been on the road for 9 hours, hauling electronics from Houston to Atlanta, pushing through to make his delivery window. The highway was empty. No other vehicles in sight. No houses nearby. Just endless Louisiana swampland stretching out on both sides of the road. Dark water reflecting starlight. Cypress trees rising like skeletal fingers from the murky depths. The screaming came from the woods along the highway. A high-pitched, terrified voice calling out into the night. "Help me! Please help me! Somebody help!" The words were desperate, panicked, the kind of plea that no decent person could ignore. Joseph's foot moved instinctively toward the brake pedal. Every moral fiber in his body told him to stop. A child was in danger. A child needed help. What kind of person would drive past a child crying for help in the middle of nowhere? But something made him hesitate. Something about the screaming felt wrong in a way he could not immediately articulate. The voice was too consistent, too repetitive. The same phrases over and over again, delivered with the same inflection, the same rhythm. "Help me! Please help me! Somebody help!" It did not sound like genuine panic. It sounded like a recording playing on loop. Joseph's grip tightened on the steering wheel. His training as a long-haul trucker had taught him to trust his instincts, to recognize when something did not add up. And this situation screamed danger despite presenting itself as a cry for help. He pulled over anyway. Not because he was convinced the situation was safe, but because the possibility that a real child might actually need help outweighed his suspicions. If there was even a chance someone was genuinely in distress out there, he had to check. But he was not going to be stupid about it. Joseph grabbed his flashlight from the glove compartment, a heavy mag light that could serve as a weapon if needed. He also grabbed his tire iron from behind the seat. Then he pulled out his phone and opened the voice recorder app, setting it to record. Whatever happened next, there would be a record of it. He stepped out of his truck cautiously, leaving the engine running and the headlights on. The screaming continued from the tree line about 30 yards off the road. "Help me! Please help me! Somebody help!" The same words, the same tone. Joseph walked toward the sound slowly, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, the tire iron gripped tightly in his other hand. The closer he got, the more certain he became that this was not a real child. The voice had a tinny quality to it now, like it was coming from a speaker rather than a human throat. He reached the edge of the tree line and pointed his flashlight into the woods. That was when he saw them. 3 men standing about 20 feet into the forest, partially concealed behind trees. One of them was holding a portable speaker, the source of the screaming. The recording played from the device, looping endlessly. "Help me! Please help me! Somebody help!" When Joseph's flashlight beam hit them, they froze for just a moment. Then they scattered, running deeper into the forest, abandoning the speaker which continued to play its horrifying recording into the empty night. Joseph's blood ran cold. This had been a trap. A deliberate, calculated trap designed to lure people off the highway and into the woods where they would be vulnerable, isolated, easy targets for robbery or worse. If he had been less cautious, if he had rushed blindly toward that crying voice without taking precautions, he would have walked right into an ambush. His hands shook as he backed away from the tree line, his eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. Were there more of them? Were they circling around behind him, even now? As he retreated toward his truck, someone threw a rock. It came from the darkness to his left, striking his windshield with enough force to crack the glass. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet night. Joseph ran. He sprinted the remaining distance to his truck, threw the tire iron into the cab, and climbed in after it. He slammed the door and locked it immediately, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. In his rearview mirror, he saw a figure emerge from the tree line and stand on the road, watching him. Just standing there, motionless, menacing. Joseph did not wait to see what would happen next. He threw the truck into gear and accelerated hard, gravel spraying from beneath his tires. The figure in his mirror grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared entirely, swallowed by the darkness. Joseph drove without stopping for the next hour, putting as much distance as possible between himself and that terrible place. His hands continued to shake. The adrenaline made his whole body tremble. He kept replaying the scene in his mind, the fake child's voice, the men with the speaker, the trap they had set. When he finally felt safe enough to stop, he pulled into a brightly lit truck stop just outside Baton Rouge. He parked under the lights and sat there for several minutes, trying to calm his racing heart. Then he called the police. The dispatcher listened to his report with what sounded like weary familiarity. Joseph gave them the exact location where he had heard the screaming, described the men he had seen, and mentioned the cracked windshield as evidence that this had been more than just his imagination. The officer who called him back 30 minutes later confirmed that what Joseph had experienced was part of a known pattern. "We have had multiple reports of this tactic over the past 6 months," the officer explained. "Criminals are using recordings of children screaming to lure drivers off the highway. Sometimes they use recordings of women crying for help, sometimes injured animals. Whatever they think will trigger people to stop and investigate. Once the victims leave their vehicles and enter the woods, they are robbed, assaulted, or worse. The officer told Joseph that 2 truckers who had stopped for similar cries for help in that area had been beaten and robbed. One had been hospitalized with serious injuries. Another driver had simply disappeared. His truck was found abandoned on the shoulder near where Joseph had stopped, but the driver himself was never located. The investigation was still open, but police suspected he had been murdered, his body disposed of somewhere in the vast swamplands that surrounded that stretch of highway. "You did the right thing by being cautious," the officer said. "And you did the right thing by calling us. We will send units to that location and see if we can find these individuals. But I have to be honest with you. They are probably long gone by now. These crews are mobile and organized. They hit a spot, and if it does not work, they move to a different location. We have been trying to catch them for months." Joseph asked why this was happening, why criminals would go to such elaborate lengths just to rob truckers. The officer's answer was blunt. Because it works. Because truckers often carry cash. Because cargo can be valuable and easy to fence. Because people on lonely highways are vulnerable and isolated. And because, frankly, we do not have the resources to patrol every mile of every rural highway where these crimes occur. These criminals know that. They exploit it. The next morning, after getting a few hours of fitful sleep in his truck, Joseph drove to a service station and had his windshield repaired. The cracks served as a physical reminder of how close he had come to disaster. While waiting for the repair, he researched the tactic he had experienced. He found forum posts from other truckers who had encountered similar scenarios. Fake children crying in the woods, fake women screaming for help, fake car accident victims calling out from ditches, all of them traps. All of them designed to exploit human compassion and turn it into vulnerability. One post particularly disturbed him. It was from a trucker who claimed his friend had stopped to help what sounded like a child in distress, only to be attacked by 4 men with weapons. The friend had been beaten unconscious and left for dead. His truck and cargo were stolen. When he woke up hours later, he was alone on the side of the road with severe injuries and no way to call for help. He had barely survived. Joseph realized how lucky he had been. His caution, his decision to bring weapons, his instinct that something was wrong, these things had saved him. But it troubled him deeply that such tactics existed, that predators were sophisticated enough to weaponize people's desire to help others. What kind of world had it become where you could not trust a child's cry for help? Where stopping to assist someone in distress might cost you your life? He shared his experience on trucker forums and social media, warning others about this tactic. The response was overwhelming. Dozens of drivers commented with their own similar experiences. Some had been in Texas, some in Florida, some in the Carolinas. The pattern was nationwide. Criminal organizations were using these psychological traps to target truckers across the country. Law enforcement was aware, but overwhelmed. The best defense was awareness and caution. Joseph completed his delivery to Atlanta, but the experience had changed him. He was more paranoid now, more suspicious of anything unusual on the road. He no longer stopped for anything that seemed out of place. He kept his doors locked at all times. He avoided rural highways when possible, preferring to stick to well-traveled interstates where there were more witnesses and more security. The recording of that fake child's voice haunted his dreams for weeks afterward. "Help me! Please help me! Somebody help!" Those words, weaponized and perverted, had lost their innocence forever. He eventually learned from law enforcement contacts that police had conducted raids in the area where he had his encounter, but found no suspects. The criminals had vanished into the vast Louisiana wilderness, likely moving on to new hunting grounds. The investigation remained open but stagnant. The victims who had been attacked or who had disappeared would likely never receive justice. And somewhere out there, those recordings were still being used, still luring unsuspecting travelers into traps, still exploiting the better angels of human nature for profit and violence. Joseph never stopped for roadside emergencies alone again. If he saw something suspicious, he called it in to authorities and kept driving. It was not heartlessness. It was survival. The road had taught him a harsh lesson that compassion without caution could be fatal. Scarlett pulled into a way station in rural Nevada around midnight. It was required by law. Any commercial vehicle over a certain weight had to stop when the way station was open, no exceptions. She had driven this route before, but never at night, and never through this particular way station after dark. The building looked abandoned despite the illuminated sign at the entrance declaring it open and operational. Most of the overhead lights in the parking area had burned out or been broken, leaving only one flickering fluorescent fixture that cast unstable shadows across the cracked pavement. No other trucks were visible in the lot, which struck Scarlett as unusual. Even at midnight, there should have been at least a few rigs going through the weighing process. She parked in the designated area and stepped out of her cab, grabbing her paperwork and her phone. The silence was oppressive. No highway noise despite being right next to Interstate 80. No insects, no wind. Just dead silence, broken only by the electrical hum of that single struggling light fixture. The way station office was a small rectangular building constructed from cinder blocks and metal siding, painted an institutional beige that had faded and peeled over decades of desert sun exposure. One window glowed with dim interior light, but Scarlett could not see anyone moving inside. She walked toward the office, her boots echoing on the pavement louder than seemed natural. The door was unlocked. She pushed it open and stepped inside, calling out a greeting. "Hello? Anyone here?" The interior looked like it had not been cleaned or updated since the 1970s. A dusty metal desk sat in the corner, covered with old coffee cups whose contents had long since evaporated into brown rings. Paperwork lay scattered across every surface, yellowed with age. Some of it dated years in the past. But the scale terminal was active, its screen glowing green, cursor blinking, waiting for input. The computer was on, fan whirring, clearly operational. Scarlett called out again. "I am here for weighing. Is anyone available?" Still no response. She considered just leaving, driving away and hoping no one would notice or fine her for skipping the way station. But that could result in significant penalties if she was caught later down the road. Way station violations were taken seriously, and her commercial driver's license could be suspended. She decided to weigh herself on the unmanned scale and document it, creating a record that she had made a good faith effort to comply with regulations, even if no inspector was present. She returned to her truck and drove it onto the scale platform. The digital readout displayed her vehicle weight within acceptable parameters. She took a photo of the display with her phone, documenting the reading with a timestamp. Then she started to drive off the scale and continue on her route. But as she circled around the way station building too, returned to the highway entrance, she saw something that made her slam on the brakes. Another truck was parked behind the building, hidden from view of the main lot. A large semi with its back doors hanging open. Curiosity overrode caution. Scarlett parked her rig and walked over to investigate. Maybe this was where the way station operator was. Maybe they were inspecting this other truck and had not heard her calling. But as she approached, she realized the truck was empty. No driver in the cab, no one in the cargo area. just an abandoned rig with its doors open like an invitation or a warning. She peered inside the trailer and felt her stomach tighten. Personal belongings were scattered throughout. Suitcases, bags, clothing, toiletries. Not freight, not commercial cargo, just people's things. Abandoned possessions. And they were not just thrown in carelessly. They were arranged, organized, like someone had been cataloging them. Scarlett noticed photographs taped to the interior wall of the trailer. Her flashlight beam swept across them, and what she saw made her blood run cold. They were pictures of trucks, different trucks at different locations, and pictures of drivers, some standing next to their vehicles, some sitting in diners, some walking across parking lots. She recognized some of the faces. They had been on missing persons posters. Truckers who had disappeared over the past 2 years along Western interstate routes. The authorities had never found them, never determined what happened to them. And here were their photographs, displayed like trophies in an abandoned trailer behind a fake way station. A vehicle pulled into the way station. Scarlett heard the engine, heard tires on pavement. Her heart seized in her chest. She was trapped behind the building, her truck parked where it would be visible to anyone entering the lot. She looked around frantically for somewhere to hide. The van that had entered was not a commercial truck. It was a white cargo van, the kind with no windows in the back. 2 men got out. She could hear their voices, muffled by distance, but definitely male, definitely casual, like they were having a normal conversation. Scarlett ran. She sprinted back toward her truck, staying low, trying to use the parked trailer as cover. But she was exposed for several seconds as she crossed open pavement. If the men looked in her direction, they would see her. Her hands shook as she reached her cab door and pulled it open as quietly as possible. She climbed inside, every movement feeling too loud, too obvious. The men's voices continued. They were walking toward the office, not the back of the building where she had been. She still had a chance. She started her engine. The diesel rumble shattered the silence like thunder. In her mirror, she saw the men turn toward the sound. They started moving in her direction, no longer walking, but running. Scarlett did not wait to see more. She threw the transmission into gear and accelerated hard. The truck lurched forward, tires squealing. She aimed for the exit, for the highway, for escape. There was a gate across the exit lane, a flimsy barrier designed to keep trucks from leaving without being weighed. Scarlett drove straight through it. Metal shrieked as the gate tore away from its supports and went flying across the pavement. She merged onto the interstate without slowing down, her speed already at 60 miles per hour and climbing. In her mirrors, she saw the white van pull onto the highway behind her. It was following. The men were chasing her. Scarlett's mind raced. She was in a commercial truck, limited to lower speeds than a passenger vehicle. They would catch up. She needed help. She grabbed her CB radio and started broadcasting on the emergency channel, giving her location, describing the van, begging for anyone who could hear her to call police. A voice responded almost immediately. Another trucker somewhere ahead of her on the highway. "I hear you. I am calling 911 right now. Keep talking. Tell me exactly where you are." Scarlett gave her location as precisely as she could, reading off mile markers as she passed them. The van was still behind her, keeping pace, not trying to force her off the road, but not backing off either. Just following, waiting. The other trucker stayed on the radio with her, keeping her calm, assuring her that police were being dispatched. Blue and red lights appeared in the distance ahead. Multiple patrol cars had created a roadblock across the interstate. Scarlett nearly cried with relief. She slowed down as she approached, pulling onto the shoulder as directed by the officers. The white van tried to turn around but found more police cars blocking the rear. They were boxed in. Officers surrounded the van with weapons drawn, ordering the men to exit with hands up. Scarlett watched from her truck as the two men were arrested and placed in separate patrol cars. A detective approached Scarlett's truck and asked her to step out and answer some questions. She told him everything. The fake way station, the abandoned truck behind the building, the photographs of missing truckers, the personal belongings arranged like a collection. The detective's expression grew darker with every detail she provided. He radioed for additional units and evidence technicians to be sent to the way station location immediately. Then he sat down with Scarlett in the back of his patrol car and took a detailed statement. "You may have just solved multiple disappearances," the detective said quietly. "We have been investigating missing truckers along this corridor for 3 years. No bodies, no leads, no pattern we could identify. If what you saw is real, if those photographs are who you think they are, this could be the break we have been looking for." He asked her to describe everything she had seen in as much detail as possible. The photographs on the trailer wall, the types of personal items, the condition of the way station, everything. Law enforcement raided the fake way station within the hour. What they found there confirmed Scarlett's account and revealed something even more horrifying. The way station had been abandoned by the state 15 years earlier due to budget cuts, but someone had reactivated it illegally. They had restored power, turned on the lights and equipment, and created the appearance of a legitimate operational facility. Truckers who stopped there, following the law and believing they were at a real way station, had been victimized. Some were robbed, some were assaulted, some disappeared entirely. The two men arrested were part of a larger criminal organization that had been targeting commercial truckers across multiple western states. They would lure drivers to the fake way station, then rob them of their cargo, personal valuables, and even their trucks. Drivers who resisted or who saw too much were killed, their bodies disposed of in the vast Nevada desert where they might never be found. The photographs Scarlett had seen represented their victims, trophies, records, evidence of their crimes proudly displayed. Digital forensics on their computers revealed connections to at least 17 missing trucker cases over a 5-year period. Some bodies were eventually recovered based on information extracted during interrogations. Others were never found. Families received closure in some cases, devastating confirmation in others, and agonizing uncertainty in the remainder. The criminal network was dismantled, with arrests made in Nevada, California, Arizona, and Utah. The case made national news and prompted federal investigations into other suspicious way stations and rest areas where truckers had vanished. Scarlett's decision to investigate the abandoned truck, while risky, had provided the evidence needed to break the case. Her quick thinking and broadcasting for help on the CB radio had likely saved her life. Law enforcement commended her courage and her composure under terrifying circumstances. But Scarlett was traumatized by the experience. She took a month off from driving to recover, seeing a counselor to process what she had witnessed and how close she had come to becoming another victim. When she eventually returned to trucking, she was different, more cautious, more suspicious. She researched every way station on her routes beforehand, verifying they were legitimate state-operated facilities. She carried additional security equipment, including a panic button that would immediately alert dispatch and authorities if activated. And she never drove alone through Nevada again, always coordinating her routes with other truckers so they could travel in convoy through that state. Some roads were more dangerous than others. Some facilities that seemed official were traps, and trusting the system blindly could cost you everything. Owen picked up a sealed trailer in Detroit on a cold October morning. Standard freight job, routine paperwork, legitimate company. The bill of lading listed the cargo as electronics, computer components destined for a distribution center in Atlanta. The shipping company was one he had worked with before, reputable and professional. Everything checked out. The seal on the trailer was intact, bearing the proper identification numbers that matched his documentation. He conducted his pre-trip inspection, verified the weight distribution, and pulled out of the facility just after dawn. The first 8 hours of the drive were completely unremarkable. Interstate 75 south through Ohio into Kentucky. Steady traffic, good weather, no mechanical issues. Owen made his scheduled stops for fuel and food, checked in with dispatch on time, and maintained his logbook with meticulous accuracy. But somewhere around the Ohio-Kentucky border, he started hearing noises from the back of the trailer. At first, he dismissed it as cargo shifting. It happens sometimes, especially with electronics packed in large boxes. Temperature changes, road vibrations, imperfect loading, these factors could cause items to settle or move during transport. The sounds were faint, barely audible over the road noise and engine rumble. Just occasional thumping, like something falling over and then being still again. Owen made a mental note to inspect the load more carefully at his next stop. But he was not particularly concerned. Shifted cargo was annoying, but rarely dangerous. The sounds continued as he drove deeper into Kentucky. They grew louder, more distinct, and more troubling. The thumping became rhythmic, almost deliberate. 3 knocks, then silence. 3 more knocks, then silence. It did not sound random anymore. It sounded purposeful. It sounded like someone knocking on the inside of the trailer, trying to get attention. Owen felt unease creep into his thoughts. That was impossible. The trailer had been sealed at the facility. No one could have gotten inside. The cargo was supposed to be electronics, just boxes of computer parts, nothing that could make deliberate knocking sounds. He turned down his radio, straining to hear more clearly. The knocking continued. Then he heard something else. Voices, muffled, distant, but unmistakably human voices coming from inside the sealed trailer. Owen's heart began to race. This was not cargo shifting. This was people. There were people inside his trailer. His mind flooded with possibilities, none of them good. Stowaways, illegal immigrants hiding in the cargo. But how could they have gotten in if the seal was intact? Unless the seal had been applied after they were already inside. Unless someone at the loading facility had put them there intentionally. Owen pulled off at the next exit, his hands shaking on the steering wheel. He found a rest area and parked in a well-lit section near other vehicles. Before getting out, he called his dispatcher. The conversation was tense and confused. Owen explained what he was hearing, and the dispatcher insisted it was not possible. The cargo manifest was clear. Electronics only. No live cargo. The seal had been verified. But Owen could still hear the sounds even while talking on the phone. The dispatcher told him to check the seal, but not to break it. If the seal was intact, he should continue to his destination and report the situation to facility management upon arrival. Breaking a seal without authorization could result in serious penalties. Owen walked around to the back of his trailer. The seal was intact, unbroken, still bearing the correct identification number. But the sounds from inside were undeniable now. Knocking, voices, multiple voices, men, women, what sounded like children. Desperate voices calling out in languages he did not understand, but the tone was universal. They were begging for help. Owen's hands trembled as he reached for the seal. Company policy be damned. Federal regulations be damned. There were people inside his trailer, and they needed help immediately. He broke the seal and pulled open the heavy doors. The smell hit him first. Unwashed bodies, waste, fear. The interior of the trailer was dark, but in the dim light from the rest area, he could see them. 12 people huddled together in the cargo area. Men, women, children. They shielded their eyes from the sudden light, blinking and confused. They looked exhausted, dehydrated, terrified. Some were crying. Some just stared at him with expressions of desperate hope. One woman clutched 2 small children to her chest. An elderly man sat against the wall, barely conscious. Owen's mind struggled to process what he was seeing. Human trafficking. He was hauling human beings like cargo. Someone had loaded these people into his trailer, sealed it, given him falsified paperwork, and sent him across state lines transporting victims. He had been unknowingly participating in one of the most horrific crimes imaginable. His stomach turned. He felt sick with horror and guilt. These people had been trapped in that sealed trailer for at least 8 hours, probably longer. No ventilation adequate for human occupancy, limited air circulation, no food or water, no bathroom facilities, just darkness and terror. He immediately pulled out his phone and dialed 911. His voice shook as he explained the situation to the emergency dispatcher. People inside his trailer, human trafficking. He gave his exact location at the rest area. The dispatcher told him to stay on the line and to keep the trailer doors open to provide fresh air to the victims. Other travelers at the rest area noticed the commotion and approached. When they saw what was inside the trailer, several of them started helping. Someone brought water bottles from their car. Someone else grabbed blankets. A woman who identified herself as a nurse began checking the victims for medical emergencies. Police arrived within 15 minutes. Multiple patrol cars and an ambulance. Then more ambulances. EMTs began treating the victims, providing water, checking vital signs, loading the most critical cases for transport to hospitals. The police officers secured the scene and began taking statements. An FBI agent arrived 30 minutes later. Human trafficking across state lines was a federal crime, and this was now a federal investigation. The agent interviewed Owen at length, recording every detail. When had he picked up the trailer? Where? Who had given him the paperwork? Had he noticed anything unusual at the loading facility? Owen told them everything he could remember. The facility in Detroit, the shipping company name, the person who had handled his paperwork, the seal number, all of it. The FBI agent made calls, dispatching teams to the Detroit location immediately. Owen learned later that the shipping company was a front operation. The facility was raided within hours. Multiple arrests were made. But the people at the top of the trafficking network had already fled, likely warned by someone inside law enforcement or the company itself. The investigation would continue for months, trying to track down everyone involved. The victims told their stories through translators. They were from Central America, promised work and safety in the United States by human smugglers who had taken thousands of dollars from each family. Instead of being transported to jobs, they had been locked in the trailer and told to stay silent. They were being moved to another location where they would be held until their families paid additional money, or where they would be forced into labor or sex work to pay off fabricated debts. 3 days locked in the trailer. Minimal food and water. No sanitation. One child was severely dehydrated and required hospitalization. An elderly woman had suffered a heart episode but survived. Owen sat in his truck after giving his statement, unable to process what had happened. He had driven for 12 years without incident. He prided himself on being professional, careful, law-abiding. And yet, he had been used as an unwitting accomplice in human trafficking. The guilt ate at him, despite everyone telling him he had done nothing wrong. How many other loads had he hauled that might have contained victims? Had there been other times when he heard strange sounds but dismissed them? Had he driven past opportunities to save people because he assumed it was just cargo shifting? The investigation revealed that Owen's situation was not unique. The trafficking network had been using legitimate trucking companies and unsuspecting drivers for months. They would create false shipping documents, apply seals to trailers containing victims, and send the loads with drivers who had no idea what they were really transporting. If the drivers heard anything suspicious, the traffickers counted on them dismissing it or not wanting to break company seals. The Storie system was designed to exploit the trust and procedures of the commercial trucking industry. 12 people were rescued because Owen had listened to those sounds and acted despite the potential consequences. Federal prosecutors praised his decision to break the seal and call police immediately. Trafficking experts estimated that those 12 individuals represented just a fraction of the total number being moved through this network. The FBI investigation eventually identified connections to at least 40 other victims who had been transported, sold, or enslaved over the previous 18 months. Some were recovered. Others remained missing. The full scope of the operation might never be fully known. Owen could not continue trucking after that experience. The psychological weight was too heavy. He kept hearing those voices, kept seeing those terrified faces. He sold his truck and took a job with a local delivery company where all his routes were within a 50-mile radius and all his cargo was visible and verified. No more sealed trailers. No more long haul. He could not handle the uncertainty, the possibility that he might unknowingly be transporting something or someone terrible. His career had been built on trust in the system, and that trust had been irrevocably broken. He became an advocate for trafficking awareness in the trucking industry. He gave presentations at trucking companies, teaching drivers how to recognize warning signs, unusual loading procedures, seals applied without driver verification, sounds from supposedly empty or inanimate cargo, suspicious documentation. He urged drivers to trust their instincts, to investigate when something felt wrong, to prioritize human life over company policy or fear of penalties. His message was simple. Some cargo is not worth carrying, and some sounds should never be ignored. The 12 people Owen saved were placed in protective custody while their legal status was resolved. Some were granted asylum. Some were returned to their home countries after testifying against their traffickers. The children received medical and psychological care. The families were connected with victim services and advocacy organizations. They all expressed profound gratitude to Owen for listening, for acting, for choosing to help them instead of completing his delivery and remaining ignorant of their suffering. He had saved their lives by breaking a seal and making a phone call. Sometimes heroism is that simple and that profound. But Owen never felt like a hero. He felt like someone who had been used, who had been made complicit in evil without his knowledge or consent. The experience changed his understanding of his profession and the systems that governed it. Trust but verify became his motto. Assume nothing, question everything. And above all, listen to what the cargo might be trying to tell you, because not all shipments are what they claim to be, and not all sealed trailers contain only objects.